It hit me when I saw a group of teenagers skateboarding, and my first thought was, man, I hope they are wearing helmets. I did not even try to fight it. It just came out. I used to be that kid ignoring adults. Now I am the adult. Story 1. Hearing myself go oof and when I sit down or stand up. Also, a young girl at my son's school called me an inappropriate name, and I felt moral and disgusted and wanted to talk to her parents. Story 2. When I was at the store the other day, a young lady asked me if I was Mr. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder Dramalik, and I cautiously said, yes. She said that I graduated high school with her mother. That was 25 years ago, not just a few years ago as I had thought. She told me her mother had shared stories about me and my challenges because it helped her with her own struggle with severe attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I was kind of floored but felt very old. Story 3. Bought my first house 4 years ago and began getting upset when I kept seeing the neighbor kids walk across my grass on the video doorbell camera. That's when it hit me. I'm one of those guys now. I am 32. Story 4. I am a track coach, 27 years old. They did a coach's 4x100-meter relay at the last meet of the year just for fun. Of course, I ran it and immediately strained my quadriceps. Took about a week to feel better. Story 5. When at work, instead of being referred to as young one, the bosses commiserate with me and talk about the young ones. I was always the youngest at any workplace, but no longer. Story 6. When I started worrying about the results of injuries during my extreme sports hobbies, I became significantly less reckless. Or maybe it is just part of being a father. Story 7. Seeing the latest explosive news about the 18-year-old model the media is praising, I think to myself, you know, she looks like a child. Story 8. When I realized, I did not notice the extremely attractive 21-year-old at the airport because her mother was there showing great intensity. Story 9. When I started getting upset seeing the foolish things teenagers do on TikTok, I remembered that I did the same things. I just did not record them for attention, only for laughs with friends. Story 10. Music these days stinks, my father said. I think Mozart's father even said it. And now I say it. Story 11. A lot of small things, but one of the significant moments was when I was talking to a girl at a bar and realized how much older I was than her. Story 12. Many times I have felt that. At 54, I realized that I do not have the energy or back to work all day in the yard like I did in my 30s and 40s. I no longer feel 26 either. Story 13. Watching The Last of Us Season 2. When Ellie and Dina hook up, the camera lingered on them, and I started feeling a bit uncomfortable because I thought, oh wow, they're not going to show these kids having sex, are they? These kids are actually 21 and 23 years old. I guess I'm just old enough now that they feel like kids to me. Story 14. I need to actively stay in shape to avoid gaining weight. I also have to watch my diet. It is frustrating. Story 15. When I became a parent, I kept thinking, wow, everyone must think I am such a young mother. But then I realized that I was 30 and everyone else with children was around the same age. Story 16. I have been a serious mountain biker for decades. I started making more decisions when walking technical trail sections instead of just going for it. With my job, family, and age, I cannot afford to get hurt. Story 17. It was definitely that one day when I randomly thought, wow, when my parents were my current age, I was 16? No, that can't be right. But it was. Also, if I had a child at 20 and they had a child at 20, I would be a grandparent right now. Story 18. Several things. 1. Mostly stopped getting carded. Found some gray chest hairs and pubic hair about the same time. Doing athletic activities that never used to bother you now makes you very sore, or moving incorrectly, or performing unfamiliar motions. The last time I did any semi-competitive sports, I ended up with a pinched sciatic nerve. Items 3 and 4 happened in my late 20s. The sciatic issue was less surprising because I had experienced back problems on and off. What I remember about item 3 was throwing a football around during halftime of a game I was watching with friends. I admittedly had not touched a football for years at that point, but in my teens, I used to go months between throwing the ball around with barely any soreness. Anyway, my arm did not remember that motion, and I could barely lift it above my shoulder for a couple of days and was sore for a week. Story 19. I started feeling old when I noticed all the new music is trash and the new slang and way the kids talk is so cringeworthy. Like, on God, bro, for real. Slay King. Nolie. Story 20. One day at work, we talked about a past event that was widely discussed in the news. A younger colleague looked at us as if he had no idea what we were talking about. Only then did we realize that it happened before he was born. None of us liked that, as we thought we weren't old. Story 21. I suddenly realized that my stamina started declining significantly whenever I remained inactive for a while, and it became more difficult and slower to build back up. Story 22. I looked out my backyard and was upset with high school students for hanging out in their own backyard. I was 13. Story 23. When I tried to jump over a puddle, my back popped. I used to be able to squat 400 pounds in college. When I first started working, I carried an industrial water pump across a field because the forklift got stuck, and now a puddle took me out. Story 24. People think that we lose our imaginations as we get older. Our imaginations work just fine. It is just that we imagine things like injuries, car accidents, getting fired, chipping our teeth, and so on. Story 25. I have to say, at my age of 62, I have more of a mustache than my husband. I even see it on television sometimes. And I giggle. Story 26. Walked into a nightclub with a group of friends. The music was loud, no surprise. The migraine I got from it in less than 2 minutes was intense. Last time I went out partying. Story 27. When I heard someone talking about having sex in the shower, my first thought was, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. One of you could fall and hit your head. Story 28. There were a few things that happened over a span of a few years. I threw out my back in the gym during the week of my 30th birthday. Most of my friends were getting married and having children, and suddenly there was a new societal pressure to also settle down because I am in my 30s, which was not there before. Story 29. The day I saw my father in the bathroom mirror, the day I realized I was old, was when I saw my grandfather in the bathroom mirror. Story 30. A fellow manager and I were talking about old television shows with our employees, and we sang the DuckTales theme. Not one person joined in with the woo, and they looked at us with completely blank faces. I know it is a very old show, but the fact that the theme song no longer resonates in the culture hurt my feelings. My ringtone is the Starlight Zone theme from Sonic the Hedgehog. Only older coworkers recognize that it is from a video game. I have only had 2 coworkers who are about 10 years older than me recognize that it is Sonic. I also had to stop using my Power Rangers communicator text message alert because I was getting irrationally angry with people thinking it was from Kim Possible. That was over 5 years ago. I do not know how many people would recognize that now. Story 31. Going on a walk, some children came and told me there was a kitten in the storm drain. I thought, damn, they need an adult. Ah shoot, it is me, isn't it? Story 32. Me at 30, still going out, can hang out with college and early 20s, loves new technology and busy cities. Me at 31, dive bars, annoyed with college kids, cannot stand technology and wants to get away from society. It was an eventful year. Story 33. For me, I have always loved television shows and movies. Some of my favorite shows ever premiered around the year 2000. So when I read things like 25th Anniversary or when I see those actors in new roles, aged and all, it really hits me. I know that is strange. But hey, Story 34. I get really annoyed if I hear loud music or sounds in general. To be honest, if I'm walking and someone is driving by, or even if the television volume is too high when I turn it on because my child adjusted it, please turn it down. I do not want to hear something just because you do. Story 35. Physically, I developed osteoarthritis in my hips and knees. Mentally, I am not even close to being old. Most of my friends are millennials and Generation Z. Hanging out with the younger crowd keeps me thinking young, although I do not always feel as young as I think I am. Story 36. When my reflexes slow down, it really hits me when I think about how long ago something was. 20 years is a long time to look back on. Story 37. The last hardcore show I went to was like the next generation is keeping the mosh pit aggressive. However, people are crowd killing regularly, and others are starting to get hurt. I might just step back a little. Story 38. When my hair decided to get lazy, no more reaching out for the heights. It has decided that the shoulders are a good place to stop, or maybe parking off in the cool, breezy nose, or the eyebrows where it can grow wild and free. And then there is the undeveloped prime real estate of the back. Story 39. When I was a child, I used to think my parents were lying when they said they got dizzy after spinning around a couple of times with me. As an adult, I realized they were not. Story 40. I went to a show, saw the lead singer outside, and told him that they were good. Then I was called a narcotic agent. Like, what the actual heck? Story 41. I went to throw something and my shoulder hurt. It was the kind of pain that made me catch my breath. I am a runner and in fairly decent shape, but that one surprised me. Story 42. When a pretty girl came up to me, I thought she was going to flirt, but she said, "I love your popcorn, Mr. Rettenbacher." Story 43. A lot of people in their late teens and early 20s now look like children to me. Also, I no longer have any interest in dating women under about 26 to 27 years old. I am 34 years old because I cannot imagine we would have much in common, and they honestly just seem like a completely different generation. Story 44. Same thing happened yesterday on my bike ride. Kids were riding all-terrain vehicles without helmets or protective gear, wearing just shorts and t-shirts. I used to be like that until I fell off the back of a bicycle motocross bike and was picking rocks out of my leg and arm for a month. Story 45. When my knees started hurting because of weather changes. Sorry, it is not a myth. I know when the weather is going to change. Or maybe it is just the air pressure change. Or I am just old and my knees hurt. But yes, when my knees started hurting when it rains. Story 46. When a younger man was curious after seeing me sitting in my car, a 1999 Nissan Maxima, he asked if older cars were reliable because his friend wanted to sell him a similar-era Toyota Camry. I explained that parts are inexpensive and basic maintenance would keep them running for a long time. He said, "Thanks, original gangster. I am only 39 years old." Story 47. Not being able to reach my toes while stretching. Keeping my legs straight in a sitting position ahead of me, sitting upright without slouching. Being excited about having a friends get-together at 1 p.m., so I could be home by 7 or 8 to lay my bones on the couch for a bit watching television before bed at 9:30. Story 48. The mere thought of eating out at McDonald's and Burger King makes me feel queasy. I remember as a kid thinking, if I had all the money in the world, I would eat there every day, while adults looked at these places with disdain and wondered how anyone could eat that food. But as a kid, I thought it was top-tier food. I still ate there quite a bit in my 20s, and while I thought it was pretty good, I definitely knew there were better options out there. Now that I am in my 30s, I realize that I have become the adult who looks at these places with disgust and wonders why anyone would spend their money on this kind of food. Story 49. I was so used to calling men older than me uncle as a sign of respect, and they would call me daughter, even if I was not related to them. It was a cultural thing. I remember I had dropped by the nearest store to get a packet of cigarettes and forgot to pick up my spare change before leaving. The elderly man at the counter ran after me and called me sister. I looked at him and kept walking because it did not register until about 2 minutes later. I thanked him, lit my cigarette, and kept thinking, I must be old now that they are calling me sister. Story 50. Went to a concert with my daughter. I could count on my fingers the number of people there who were my age or older. There were many girls who looked like high school students drinking alcohol. That was my first real moment of realizing I am old. Story 51. I was walking downtown the other day with some friends and decided to show off by walking on my hands for about 15 feet. As soon as I was back on my feet, I felt all the muscles in my back spasming. I still felt the occasional twitch for the next few days. Story 52. When a child who was about 8 years old told me the phone in my office building was broken because it did not have a send button. It occurred to me that the child had never lived in a world without smartphones. This happened to me when I was 25. I have felt old ever since. Story 53. I got married late, 11 years ago at 41. We were looking at our engagement pictures the other day, and I pointed out that I didn't have any gray hairs in my beard or hair in those pictures compared to now, where it's more 60% gray to 40% brown. I pointed this out to my wife that before we got married, I didn't have a single gray hair. Maybe coincidence? It didn't go over very well. Story 54. Damaged my rotator cuffs playing Beat Saber for 4 hours and continued playing before I was healed. I do not play Beat Saber anymore. Story 55. I strained a muscle in my lower back while cycling. It has been over 1 month, and the pain has not completely gone away. Story 56. I had a skateboarder, age 25, who worked for me. Every Monday, he would come in with injuries from doing reckless activities. I tried for years to get him to wear a helmet, but I think they like the battle wounds from attempting impressive jumps among their friends. Quiet, old man. Story 57. I jumped off the back of a small set of bleachers, like I had done 100 times since I was 10 years old. I said, "Geez, that shook me more than I expected." Story 58. The last few years have been intense. I noticed my face looks different in the mirror and pictures, with wrinkles on the forehead. I am becoming aware that old chapters of life are distinctly closing instead of just being out of sight. Suddenly, I am the older person at my gym instead of the younger one. There have also been significant shifts in my perspective and values. Story 59. My wife and I were at an Irish pub enjoying the band. We had been going there for a long time. She looked around between songs and said there were a lot of old people there. I looked around too and thought, yes, it was always like that. As I took a sip of my beer, I realized, wait, we are always here. That means we are the old people. Both of us had a look of shock and fear as we realized we were the very people we had just dismissed. She said, "Oh no, what do we do?" I said, "We keep drinking," and we continued our night. I reflect on that as the moment I realized I was old. Story 60. I was just going up the stairs, but I ran out of breath and my knees started to ache. It never used to be like that. That is when it hit me. I was getting old. Story 61. In the middle of a blizzard, my younger coworker walked in wearing a parka, shorts, and flip-flops. I asked him where his gloves were. Story 62. I saw someone the other day riding a bicycle on the road. They were following traffic with cars in front and behind and decided to pop a wheelie in the road. I audibly gasped, was horrified, and felt an urge to sternly yell at them. "What if you fell, you idiot?" I did not yell at them because they were going too fast, but my instant disgust and fury at their wheelie pulling made me feel like a strict parent. A big joy kill of a parent. I quite often have an urge to parent other people's half-grown fools and have to fight it. Story 63. The other day, I passed a couple of kids in an aisle at the corner store. One of them passed me and said, "Excuse me, sir." Story 64. One day I was cheering for this football player, and it hit me that he is about 5 years younger than me. Story 65. When the children on the soccer team started calling me coach, it changed my perspective. I was 25 years old, but it made me realize that I was becoming an authority figure, not just a carefree youth. Story 66. It manifested itself as disgust for the new video games being released. I have not played any new games in almost a decade, except for a few highly promoted games or specifically endearing series. Story 67. I am a veterinarian and was a collegiate athlete. I never had any major injuries. I injured my dominant arm and knew I either tore or strained something. It ended up being an ulnar collateral ligament tear. The doctor told me that I did not really need surgery since it is an injury that matters less and less as we get older. I understood that. Story 68. I'm 38 and in really good shape, but the young men in their teens and 20s are doing crazy activities at the climbing gym that I have come to realize I am never going to be able to do. Do not even get me started on their bouldering dismounts from the tops of walls. My knees would be seriously injured. My age has not hindered me in sports until now. Story 69. Went to the batting cages a few weeks ago. Watched a fastball split air at 80 to 90 miles per hour a couple of times and stepped right back out. There was a time when I could line drive every ball. Now, my reaction speed is much slower, and I think twisting my torso that fast would throw out my back. It is a tough thing to realize you are not what you once were. Story 70. I slipped on some wet grass and seriously injured my foot. I am pretty clumsy, so I expected the usual, "Oh, you" reaction. But no, it was not just a trip. It was a fall. You guys, I had a fall. That was the moment I knew I was now old. Story 71. One day, I realized my good knee, the one that does not have a surgically repaired anterior cruciate ligament, hurts when I walk downstairs and crunches when I walk upstairs. Story 72. When I had my first hangover in my 30s, it hit like a freight train and lasted 2 days. I remember early 20s hangovers being about 3 hours, and they were over quickly. Not anymore. Story 73. Snowboarding with some friends. Afterwards, we were having beers in the parking lot, chatting. After a while, one of them exclaimed, "I love hanging out with you older guys. You have the best stories." We wanted to kick his ass. Until that moment, he was just one of the guys. I hadn't thought about the 20-plus year age gap until he said that. Story 74. Either when I realized that my popular culture references were older than the audience, or when I stopped relating to young adults' humor. Story 75. My first gray hairs in my beard, and I couldn't function well on 4 hours of sleep anymore after long nights of gaming. Also, certain styles didn't seem appealing, and watching anime protagonists started to all look like children instead of someone potentially around my age. Story 76. When I went on a date with a 22-year-old and she started complaining about her parents, I quietly agreed with her. Story 77. There is a time in every man's life when he sees a mother walking with her teenage daughter and realizes that it is the mother he is noticing. Story 78. My sister is 17. I am 26. She thinks she knows the world and is going to make a lot of money in her first job and afford to live on her own immediately after high school. I had to break the news to her. I realized she is 17. I thought I had my life set at 17, and I was absolutely wrong. I still feel like I am not an adult. Story 79. When I kept meeting men in their 20s while traveling, usually backpackers, sleeping around and extending the hookup culture to other parts of the world, it made me feel old and slightly embarrassed for them. I mean, you do you and all that, but I knew for sure that it is no longer my scene. Story 80. I'm in my mid to late 40s, so not everyone will get this. However, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was probably around 2005. I was talking to a younger guy at work. At the time, I was around 30 and he was maybe 21 or 22. I was looking at the newspaper and I excitedly said, "Motley Crue are touring and coming to our city." He stared at me blankly and said, "Who's Motley Crue?" I thought to myself, oh my God. Story 81. I need to stretch regularly for normal daily activities. I used to play soccer almost daily in school. I never felt the need to stretch before doing anything. I could show up and not stretch, and it was never a problem for me. Then I took a year off from playing in college, and later went back to intramural soccer once a week. At that point, I needed to stretch to play and could feel the difference. That was 10 years ago. Now, I need to stretch daily because my hips and quadriceps get tight. Story 82. When I turned 30, I checked my blood pressure. It was 220 over 180 or something like that. I double-checked to make sure, and it was that high. I was rushed to the emergency room and waited for 12 hours, only to be given a set of pills to control it. It is better now, 12 years later, but it made me realize the importance of controlling my life rather than eating and doing whatever I want. Story 83. When I would rather be home on a Friday and Saturday night instead of going out. Being home feels more comfortable and secure. When you outgrow the friends you had in your teens and 20s. Some people just drift out of your life and you are completely fine with it. When you realize chasing women is a huge waste of time and energy. The juice is not worth the squeeze. When hangovers last longer. When you accept yourself for who you are, flaws and all. Story 84. I went on a hiking trip. It was great. I was having a blast. My knees were hurting, which is common on hiking trips. However, on this specific trip, I fell on my face. I remember falling in my youth and being able to bounce right back up. I did not bounce this time. Story 85. I cannot eat the foods I used to. I can, but I would end up in the bathroom half the night. Staying up late is something I do not want to do anymore. If I need to stay up past 9 o'clock, I just put it off until tomorrow. I look forward to the weekend and the small projects I can do around the house. I do not like today's music, television shows, or movies. I prefer to watch the shows I enjoy. Story 86. Shortly after I turned 40, I realized my tired-looking face was no longer a tired-looking face. It was just my new baseline. Story 87. When I was on the campus of my old college, a group of sorority girls walked past. They all looked to me as if they should still be in middle school. Story 88. When I was young, if my muscle was sore, I just thought the gains were coming. Now, I have to assess if it is muscle soreness or if I actually hurt myself, and wonder how long this is going to take to recover. Story 89. When my younger work colleagues started using slang that I did not understand, I realized I am now so old that young people literally do not speak my language. Story 90. Stress over things not starting until 8 or 8:30 p.m. Thinking teenagers wear awful clothes now. Tired 99.9% of the time. The list goes on. Story 91. The soundtrack gives it away. I cannot reach down to pick something up off the floor without some type of noise coming out of my mouth. Story 92. I think my first realization that I was getting old was the first time I said, "It was 20 years ago," and realized I wasn't 9 when it happened. Story 93. Keeping an eye on neighborhood children. If I hear a call for help or a strange shout, I always look out. I also pay attention when I hear dogs barking. Story 94. A few years ago, my knees started hurting out of nowhere. It didn't get better with rest, so eventually I went to the orthopedic doctor. He ordered imaging, and it turned out I had a mild meniscus tear. I asked him how this could happen without any injury or trauma, and he said, "You know how you have gray in your beard? Well, you have gray in your meniscus, too." That really affected me. Story 95. I was in town in the evening, and it was quite cold. I saw a group of young girls dressed to the nines, and all I could think was, "Oh my God, it is too cold for that outfit." The second that thought formed, I rolled my eyes at myself because I used to dress just like that a few more than 10 years ago. Story 96. Somewhere in my late 30s. It was my first job where I had to wear a suit all day. Suddenly, people were calling me sir. Story 97. You become accustomed to the daily pain. Only when you take a vacation do you realize the pain your body should not be feeling to begin with. Story 98. I'm 64 and starting to get Medicare literature from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. I consider myself young old. I can't do things like I did when I was 20, but I'm still in better condition than most of my chronological peers. Story 99. I saw a group of young people ready for a night out at the club, but it was still early and they were already intoxicated. I worried they probably had not eaten a full meal before going out, and that is when I realized I am old. Story 100. Similar story to the original posters. I work in the news and we were covering a story about local public transit workers striking for a better contract. I was parked editing video at a transit hub's parking lot, and across the street from the transit hub, I saw a group of teenagers hanging out. Normally, I wouldn't care, but something made me a little uneasy about all of them being there. I wasn't sure if they were going to cause trouble or if someone might create trouble for them. Immediately, I thought, it's 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. Why aren't these kids in school? Then I realized I am old at only age 33. Story 101. When I sit on a stool, I cannot sit for 5 minutes without my back hurting. I need back support. Story 102. I am 21 years old and I see grown adults not wearing helmets in the city where I live. It is outrageous. Do you think it is ugly or not cool? You know what is ugly and not cool? A neck brace, or worse yet, a coffin. Story 103. A few years ago, I was sitting at a stoplight listening to a song my youngest child had introduced me to. "It's a great song, Dad." I like to listen to my music loud. So, I was sitting at the light, bouncing in my seat to the beat, when I noticed a carload of kids around my youngest age, all laughing and giving me the thumbs up. I did not think anything of it. My youngest does random things in public, and we are not going to discuss my youthful mistakes. The light changed and they sped off. I idly wondered why the laughter when I caught a glimpse of gray hair blowing in the wind. Oh right, I am old. Story 104. I went back to get my master's degree and discovered that most of the students had gone straight from undergraduate to graduate school, with very little experience outside of academia. Story 105. It would not work in English because there is only one way to say you, but my native language has two ways of saying it. One is informal, normally used with people you know or peers, and the other is formal, used with people who are above you in rank, age, and so on. It is a show of respect to use the second one. There are many cultural nuances that demand the use of one or the other in any given situation, but the important one in this context is that young adults typically address other young adults with the informal version if there are no factors requiring the formal one. However, young adults are expected to address older adults with the formal version, usually determined by the apparent age and maturity difference to both parties. By now, you can probably see where I am going with this. I went through my 20s without making a huge distinction between myself and other people in their 20s. I addressed them with the informal version and expected them to do the same with me. But somewhere in my late 20s, a person in their early 20s, in an otherwise informal scenario, first addressed me with the formal version. The feeling of, oh, they see me as the old, respectable adult hit me for the first time. It was bizarre. At the time, I did not yet feel hugely disconnected from people in their early 20s, but all it took was that one instance to realize the feeling was no longer mutual because some of them now see me as the more adult and no longer treat me like one of their own. Story 106. That is old young. I needed frequent examinations in the hospital as a child. I was waiting in the waiting room, and when it was my turn, a nurse would call Comics Nerd. After some time, the nurse called for Mr. Comics Nerd, and I knew I had upgraded to the grown-ups. Story 107. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, I could reach my physical peak and compete with professional athletes. Back then, I told myself the only reason I was not at their level was because I was younger, and that once I reached their age, I would be even better. Now, I catch myself calling athletes these kids, as if I am much older than them. Turns out most of them are almost half my age. Story 108. When I was 23, injuries suddenly stopped healing on their own. Since then, everything I have injured requires physical therapy and regular stretching and exercise for the rest of my life to stay healed. Story 109. Trotting along the rim of the dumpster at work as I had done countless times, I dismounted to a pallet of salt, down to a chair, and fell to the ground. No injuries occurred, but I could have been seriously hurt. With a new job and a new baby on the way, I decided while still on the ground that those days are over. From then on, I took the stairs instead. Story 110. I am a person who likes pop music. Normally, I follow the charts and tend to like most of what is popular, or at least I did. One day, I cannot pinpoint the exact day, but I was listening to the radio, and everyone on the radio seemed to know this artist as if they were a big superstar. I had never even heard of them. I know that is fairly normal. However, previously I usually knew who was up and coming, and as their single climbed the charts, it would be on my radar at minimum. Honestly, I was shocked. Having an artist with a top 10 single while I was clueless about who they were, never having heard the song, and it being a total mystery was something new to me. This happened when I was 31. The artist was Drake, and it was his second album, not mixtape album. To make it worse, I am Canadian, so he gets a lot more play here due to Canadian content rules. It is basically impossible to avoid a Canadian artist who is even halfway popular. Story 111. I saw a group of neighborhood children sitting on top of the combined mailbox for our block. I was compelled to yell at them to get off of there before realizing I would sound like the angry old man at the end of the row. Story 112. The ongoing joint pain that was previously explained as growing pains. Feeling tired even after getting a consistent and decent amount of sleep. Focusing on hydration and healthy eating instead of craving fast food and sugar. Enjoying gardening of all things. realizing this is it for the next 40 to 50 years. Story 113. You are not crazy for thinking that. When I was in college, I saw a young man in the parking lot having a seizure from brain or spinal injury after falling off his skateboard. His friends were nearby. An ambulance arrived shortly afterward. Story 114. I guess for me it was when I got my current job about 3.5 years ago. I work in information technology for a pizza chain, so I go in and out of different stores throughout the day and interact with various managers and store employees, most of whom are between 18 and 23 years old. I just can't keep up with the language, the culture, and the interests. I get so lost. Sometimes I talk about hip-hop with them because I think I'm cool like that, but the number of them who think Jay-Z is bad is more than enough proof for me. You would never catch anyone my age who grew up on Jay-Z saying something like that. Story 115. None of you ever had one of your kids straight tell you that you aren't young anymore? My 3-year-old son was driving me crazy one day, and I told him, "Sweetheart, I can't do everything at once. Okay? I'm just one girl." He said, "Mom, you haven't been a girl in a long, long time." I was 27. It also coincided with the end of people asking me if my mom was home whenever I answered the door, and I stopped having bartenders ask for my identification. I had a baby face and looked like a 16-year-old forever. I could have done some 21 Jump Street stuff. I had a friend who was 6 feet tall, and I would get asked if she was my mom when we went out in our early 20s. I had to have my husband come to our son's pediatrician visits because his doctor thought I was a single teenage mother and was very judgmental and mean to me. But unfortunately, those days are gone. I am always called ma'am, even when the interaction is over the phone, like my voice sounds old too, and I do press 1 to take the optional customer service survey after the phone call ends. I love asking to speak to someone's supervisor when they are feeding me nonsense. I'll know I have fully arrived when I start writing my congressman to complain about potholes in the streets. Story 116. I started working part-time at a retail store I had left about 5 years earlier, and some of the younger employees would call me old man while I was in my 20s. Story 117. Lots of things at once. I couldn't just get up and go run 6 miles without working up to it anymore. I started not having any clue about the bands people were talking about. I stopped getting the vibe from the college interns at my work that I was someone they viewed as a peer. Story 118. When my penis stopped working 100% of the time, don't get me wrong, it still works about 95% of the time. However, when I started having that shadow of doubt. Story 119. I was 32 years old, sleeping with a 24-year-old. She definitely made me feel old on purpose whenever I mentioned something from my time. Story 120. When I yawned and stretched one day, I got a severe muscle cramp that kept me bedridden for an additional 30 minutes. Story 121. As an apprentice, I got called kid a lot. The year I was going to be 30, before the day even came, I was not considered a kid anymore. Story 122. I saw a fight between 2 teenage girls a couple of weeks ago while I was at the park waiting for my son's bus. It was totally planned. They all showed up and did more walking around, talking and puffing up their chests. Yes, the girls, it was weird than actual fighting. The 2 finally started to tussle, and all I could think was, seriously? What is wrong with them? Followed by, am I supposed to do something? Should I break it up? Should I yell at them? I had no idea what to do. The other mothers at the park who have lived here since they were teenagers all said this was not the first park fight and they had done it before, so I just let them do their thing. It lasted only 2 minutes before the friends pulled them apart. There was no winner, which was disappointing as far as a fight goes. I just kept thinking, who plans a fight? Anytime it has happened around me, it was always in the moment. If people had time to cool down, the fight never happened. That's when I knew I was old. Ha, I'm good with it. Story 123. When I was about 25, I went with my teenage brothers to the basketball court where we met other kids their age. I have played basketball my whole life, but I was just watching them play. At some point, they were missing a player, and one of the boys asked my brother if his father, which is me, would like to join in. I joined in, played for about 10 minutes, and then was exhausted for the next 2 days. Story 124. 36 slapped me in the face so hard, I'm still feeling it 8 years later. It just hits you. 36 was when my body said, you know, man, maybe being a soldier is not for you anymore. I finally put down the uniform at 42 after 16 years of service. Also, my body cannot bend the way it used to. Being a plumber these days is tiring. Story 125. It took me 3 days to recover from one night of hanging out and drinking. I did not get drunk or anything, just very buzzed. I am turning 26 this year. Story 126. It was when people my age started looking old. Crow's feet, slightly drooping jowls, male pattern baldness, and a general auntie or uncle vibe. Story 127. I am a 33-year-old male. Recently, I went to New Orleans for a bachelor party. It took me a week to recover physically and mentally from the drinking. My sleep heart rate variability data even confirms this. I have been cutting back in general for a while now because I realized that even a beer on a work night was enough to throw off the balance of my next day. Nowadays, I mostly drink only on special occasions like a bachelor party. Story 128. Basically the same situation. One of the neighborhood kids was doing bicycle wheelies past my house, and my toddler was very impressed. The kid stopped and talked for a minute, told me my motorcycle was cool, answered my son's questions about his bike. Then I said, "That's really cool, man. You have great balance, but you should really wear a helmet." It was an immediate inner cringe. I didn't even plan on saying it. It just came out. Of course, the kid was like, "Yeah, okay, gotta go." Immediately, I saw myself as the fat old man who once told me the same thing as a kid. Story 129. Hangovers got tough at 29. I quit smoking at 34, and even the thought of drinking a single beer makes me cringe now at 37. How getting drunk, smoking, and even social drinking made me feel was just not worth the fun I had. I drank and smoked socially my whole life. It was never an addiction. If other people weren't around, I didn't drink, but smoking became a bit much on my own. I had my daughter at 34, and all of a sudden, the stop-start quitting literally just happened overnight. Please just let me go to the gym and drink a Powerade after. Story 130. I used to have 2015 vision. The first time I could not read a street sign that I should have been able to read was unsettling. Story 131. I went to a concert recently on my own, and I must have been at least 10 years older than the average age there. Everyone was dressed very oddly, and I felt really out of place. Story 132. About 5 years ago, the colt I was riding acted fresh and goofy. He stepped on a tree limb on the ground, which rolled up and touched him somewhere underneath. He tried to lift off the ground, jumping left and landing right, while I was just hanging on for dear life. I managed to ride him, but it took a few minutes. When he finally calmed down, I was not sure which of us was breathing harder. The next morning, I was late because I could barely walk. Between my bruised inner thighs and aching back, I was nearly useless. Story 133. When I turned 26 years old, I started to notice that all my bones began to click and pop. Additionally, injuries started to linger just a little longer. Story 134. I was talking with a coworker. He and I are both hard workers, always putting in extra hours. I said, "These kids, they just don't want to work these days. Don't they need money?" In response to a complaint about one of our younger coworkers. I stand by that. These kids today want everything easy. They really do believe hard work will kill them. You know, when you're working hard, just before you die, you pass out. You cannot work to death. Story 135. I am 19 and I recently lost the ability to treat my body however I want without it responding. I miss when I could sleep in any position and wake up well rested. Story 136. My passwords. I suddenly realized I am still using 32 in there, the age when I started to pay attention to passwords. 25 years ago. I am 57. How did that even happen? Story 137. When kids started calling me Mr. or Sir, when I started to see people in their late teens to early 20s as literal children. When I realized that when my parents were my age, they had stable jobs, a mortgage, a car, and 3 kids, with me, the eldest, already in middle school. If I had had kids as soon as I graduated high school, I would be the father of a teenager. When I began to understand how life works and even started to give advice to younger people going through challenges I struggled with at their age. Story 138. I used to function well during the day with just 4 hours of sleep. My eyes feel heavy the entire day, and I experience an afternoon headache if I do not get more than 6 hours. Story 139. In the morning, when I first wake up and need to pick something off the floor, I have to do a risk versus reward thought process. This started in my late 30s. Story 140. I was 21 when the first Jurassic World came out. I remember sitting in the theater, being annoyed at the child for running through the crowd. Story 141. When I could no longer stay awake until my usual bedtime, my knees also started hurting when getting up from kneeling. Story 142. I am almost always tired, and I will not allow coffee to make me feel falsely awake. So I enjoy red rose tea. Maybe I have too much of it. I have about 3 to 6 cups a day. Story 143. My college friends and I went on a whitewater rafting trip hosted by a river guiding group. At the campfire, none of the dancing girls noticed us, and almost all refused to dance with us. We were between 27 and 32 years old. The fact that my friends thought they were invisible and did not even try was annoying to me. Then I joined them. Story 144. When I injured my back for the first time in my life at the age of 39 while bending over to pick up an empty laundry basket. Story 145. I was pumping gas and some teenagers were next to me goofing around. They were swearing loudly, and I thought to myself, I wonder if your mother knows you talk like that. I then had a reflective moment. Story 146. When my friend's kids called a VHS a box thing. They are super cool, and the trends in their middle school are similar to ones I had then. Now I am chatting with them all the time about, oh, when I was in middle school. I also gave one of them one of my shirts I do not wear much anymore. Fits her, but it looks so different on her. For some reason, that just sent my brain. I do not have kids, and I still feel pretty young, but I am also realizing that I am at the age where I once thought someone was an old lady. So yeah, whatever. I am still 34 years young, but obviously not young. I also had to argue with them that some of my millennial slang is still cool, and some of their Generation Alpha slang is strange. I am an adult. Story 147. As a man, when I started sitting down on the toilet more often to urinate instead of standing up at home, it became more comfortable. Story 148. Several things. Most, if not all, people I know have kids who are almost in middle school. The other day, I was shaving my face, and after wiping off the residual cream, it took me a second to really notice how much I've aged. My baby face is now filled in by this grown man's skin. Hearing teenagers' sense of humor trying to be edgy, remembering we used to sound like that and thought it was so cool. Having to scroll further back on the year menu when filling out anything online anymore. Despite being single with no kids, somehow having a father figure type look. Story 149. When my wife and I went to buy glasses, we used to have great vision, but it is slowly deteriorating. Every pair we tried made us look old, every single pair. I wish we had started wearing glasses at 15. Maybe it would have protected our vision a bit and at least gotten us used to wearing them. Story 150. I played high-level travel baseball in the past. I played for Tom House in California and spent some time playing in the villages of the Dominican Republic. I tried to catch a bullpen for my nephew the other day. I thought my knees were going to explode, and my back was stuck. Story 151. Ran a mile and a half for the first time in years. Had expensive shoes and everything. Even though I did it in great time, it was only about 13 minutes and 30 seconds, a skill you learn in the 3-mile club in the military, also known as push yourself until you almost puke. I was sore for about 10 days. I'm gonna have to start with walking long distances before I run again. I'm not even 40 yet. Story 152. Jumping over a fence and falling flat in front of a group of people. In the past, that would not have been a problem. At that moment, I just lay on the ground, grunting and moaning while they laughed. Story 153. When the kids at the after-school program I was working at called base set Pokemon cards from my childhood, antique cards from the 1900s. I also had an I am old moment today because I am the oldest apprentice in my class. We were just relaxing in class since it was the last week and we had completed our syllabus. Someone brought their Nintendo Switch and started playing Mario 64 in the 3D Mario collection. One of my classmates said, "I remember playing this on my Nintendo DS when I was 6." To which I replied, "I remember playing this on my Nintendo 64 when I was 6. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye."